Okay, we are now live, so we're just going to wait a moment for the attendees to filter in. We are expecting a decent crowd tonight, so we're just going to give it a moment. Okay, I'm going to give it one more moment. Okay, looks like everyone is here, and if they're not here yet, they'll be here any second. So we're just going to begin. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Laura Gramis. I am the Public Information Officer for Lehigh County. I handle public relations and media outreach, such as social media, that kind of work for the county. If you're joining us before, I'd like to thank you again for attending the 2021 Citizens Academy. I have been hosting these weekly webinars featuring all the departments in Lehigh County. Tonight's presentation, we will be focusing on the District Attorney's Office. If you've attended before, you know how these work, but if not, I would like to remind everyone today that, again, our presentation will focus on the DA's role in Lehigh County. We ask that you refrain from all questions and comments until after the panelist is finished presenting or during a break in the presentation when prompted. Again, this is a disclaimer that we are only accepting questions related to tonight's presentation regarding each panelist's presentation. Any off-topic, disruptive, or aggressive comments or remarks will not be acknowledged and could result in an automatic dismissal from the webinar. So we ask everyone stays on their best behavior. If you are joining us via computer or a mobile app, please select the raise your hand option to request to speak. If you're joining us by telephone, you will need to press *9 to ask to speak. Only a moderator will then be able to unmute you and give you the floor to ask your question. We ask everyone when it is your turn to ask a question to keep your question short and under a minute, just for time purposes. We have a lot of panelists who are willing to present tonight, that we want to make sure we stay on schedule. After you do ask your question, we will then take away the ability to speak and give the panelists the floor. So that is all from my end. I would like to pass the floor to District Attorney Jim Martin. Jim, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Laura. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jim Martin. I've been privileged to serve as District Attorney of Lehigh County since January of 1998, now over 23 years. I hope and I believe that we've put together an informative program for those of you participating in the Citizens Academy, and I thank you for your participation and your interest. I'm going to provide an overview of the District Attorney's Office and our function, but we have a complement of 11 other panelists who I believe will provide more significant information than will I. They all play important roles in the office in various areas of our responsibility. First, I think you should know that what the qualifications of district attorney are. And by statute, it's required that the district attorney first be a resident of the county for at least 1 year prior to assuming office, that he or she shall be admitted to practice as an attorney before the Supreme Court of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for at least 1 year prior to assuming office. In addition, the DA must be at least 25 years of age. I vouchsafe that I meet that criteria and then some. The DA can hold no other office except in some counties of the 8th class in the Commonwealth. If you are in an 8th class county, you may have an option of being part-time. Going back to 2005, we made all DAs throughout Pennsylvania by legislation full-time, except for some select DAs in 8th class counties. It was an interesting time period. Back in 2005, there's 67 counties in Pennsylvania, And at that time, only 26 were full-time district attorneys, and that created a lot of problems in terms of conflicts of interest and so forth. So it was a good thing that we created that full-time district attorneys legislation. A district attorney who is full-time is compensated at the rate of $1,000 less than the compensation paid to a judge of the Court of Common Pleas. Currently, that salary is $185,665. The Commonwealth annually reimburses each county with a full-time district attorney in an amount equal to 65% of that salary. By virtue of recent legislation over the last 3 weeks or so, if there is a vacancy in the office of district attorneys in all counties excepting Philadelphia and Allegheny, the first assistant district attorney shall succeed the district attorney. And that, I think, is a good thing also. By the way, the first assistant district attorney is designated as such by the district attorney. In Lehigh County, the first assistant is Steve Luksa, who you will hear from in a short period of time. We have in my office 27 full-time assistant DAs and 1 part-time assistant DA. Over 10 different budget lines in the Lehigh County budget. The Office of District Attorney comprises about $13.5 million, of which 38% or $5.1 million is derived from grants and or reimbursement of cost. Some of you may not know, but we have an auto theft task force and an insurance task force. Those 2 task forces are each independently funded by authorities formed by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and collectively we receive about $1 million a year to fund those budgets. The auto theft and insurance fraud task forces are comprised mainly of municipal police officers on temporary duty, and we reimburse those municipalities who participate with the full salary and fringe benefit cost of those officers who are assigned to those task forces. They investigate, as you probably can conclude, auto thefts and insurance fraud. The DA is charged with the responsibility of prosecuting all felonies and misdemeanors which arise in the county. And pursuant to the Commonwealth Attorneys Act, the district attorney is the chief law enforcement officer for the county of which he or she is elected. I've been asked on occasion over the last 23 years, who is your boss? My answer to that is the citizens of Lehigh County. The district attorney is an independent elected official, and I really don't have a boss other than the citizens and the voters of Lehigh County. Obviously, I work with the county administration in terms of budget and some personnel issues, but no one in either local or state government can dictate to the district attorney how he or she should perform the duties of his or her office. In a typical year in Lehigh County, we prosecute about 5,600 to 5,800 adult criminal cases and somewhere between 750 to 900 juvenile matters. The district attorney, and many people don't understand or appreciate this, but the district attorney is really and must be a minister of justice. And consequently, as a district attorney, I have legal and ethical duties to preserve the rights of criminal defendants. First and foremost, I am interested in, of course, and the main goal of the office is public safety. But in carrying out my duties to the citizens of Lehigh County in terms of public safety, I still must remain cognizant of the rights that defendants have and proceed carefully and in accordance with the Constitution of both the United States and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to preserve their rights. There's some responsibilities about the office about which you probably will not hear separate presentations. However, I do want to bring to your attention a couple of things that you may not be familiar with. In 1998, we formed a central booking function for DUI defendants. And we processed all those people who were suspected or charged with driving under the influence at a separate location. At the time, it was in a laboratory on Lehigh Street in Allentown. In 2007, I enlarged that to include all crimes that are charged in Pennsylvania. So every criminal defendant who is facing prosecution is transported to Lehigh County Jail, where we have a separate section for central booking. And there, those people are processed, meaning that they have their mugshots taken, fingerprints taken. In the case of driving under the influence suspects, they have blood drawn, they have field sobriety tests administered, and other written tests. After they are processed, they are brought before a video conferencing system with the magisterial district judges in the county for purposes of preliminary arraignment. The magisterial district judge will inform the defendants of their rights, what charges they're facing, and will set bail. Working with the chiefs of police in 2001, we established the Municipal Emergency Response Team, or MIRT. MIRT responds to high-risk situations such as barricaded gunmen. God forbid if we had any active shooters in Lehigh County, MIRT would respond. They also respond frequently for high-risk, what the police departments deem to be high-risk execution of either arrests or search warrants. In 2005, we formed the Homicide Task Force, which aids and assists all the police departments in the county, including the Pennsylvania State Police, in the investigation of criminal homicides that occur within the county. In 2013, we opened the Regional Intelligence and Investigation Center, or the RIC, which is a sophisticated data mart and data sharing facility that aids police in investigating crimes in both Lehigh and Northampton counties. Northampton County joined with us in that pursuit a couple of years ago. Of note, over the past year, personnel at the RIC have been working with Homeland Security investigations in Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia to replicate, for purposes of Homeland Security, a federal agency, our very robust gang intelligence system. To help combat the opioid epidemic, we've established through and in cooperation with Lehigh County Human Services and Drug and Alcohol Program within the county, a program called Blue Guardian. Blue Guardian, it comes into action when someone who is an opioid abuser or suffers from opioid addiction has overdosed and has been administered Narcan or naloxone, which revives people under those circumstances. And when that occurs, Blue Guardian kicks in, and a uniformed police officer, together with a certified recovery specialist, makes a house call on the person who has been revived in an effort to have that person get into treatment for their addiction. And that program to date has been very successful. Those are some areas that may not be apparent typically, but are important cogs in the wheel of justice in Lehigh County. I'm going to introduce now, as I said, First Assistant District Attorney Stephen M. Luksa, who will talk to you about major cases in the office, the Homicide Task Force, and two other very valuable programs which he administers, the first being Team MISA and the second being the Veterans Mentoring Program. Before I do that, though, I want to point out that over the last 23 years, we've prosecuted in this office 276 defendants who have been charged with criminal homicide. We've convicted 97.4%, or 269 out of those 276 of criminal homicide. At least 14 of the assistants in my office have prosecuted murder cases over that time. And Steve Luksa has done quite a number of homicide prosecutions, and he's done an outstanding job over the past 13 years that he's been first assistant. So it's my pleasure now to introduce the First Assistant District Attorney of Lehigh County, Stephen M. Luksa. Steve?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Appreciate the kind words. Thank you, Laura, for moderating this. And I'd like to thank everybody for attending this evening. I hope this program has been and will continue to be informative. Now, I would say that the county IT fixed my microphone today, so hopefully everyone can hear me. And if not, well, I guess you'll just see my face for a few minutes. But I was asked to do a presentation on three specific things: our homicide task force, Team MISA, and VMP. And I said, well, we can do that. And so how much time do I have? And I was told about 5 minutes. So hopefully I'm going to be really quick. Everyone else, every panelist up here thinks I'm going to talk for longer than 5 minutes. So hopefully I'm going to prove them wrong. But anyway, I'm Steve Luksa. I'm with the Lehigh County District Attorney's Office. I've been working for Lehigh County since 1993. I've been the first assistant. Jim asked me to be his first assistant in 2007. And I do a lot of the major cases in this office, including a lot of homicide cases. And I would say that this office is pretty complex and it's very unique. And we do a lot of amazing things here for the members of the community. And you're going to hear from some amazing panelists tonight about what we do. Each of us wear a couple different hats, and I think we all do a fantastic job. And I hope we make the citizens proud of how we prosecute and handle cases, because we have to consider, we want to protect the victims and give the victims a voice. We want to protect and make our community feel safer. And we want to bring justice to the defendant, do what is right by the defendant and fair. In the time that I've been here, I would say that a lot of the cases I've been focused on are homicides. In 2005, Jim created what we call the Homicide Task Force. And today the Homicide Task Force consists of 7 detectives, collectively approximately 188 years of experience between all the detectives. And Jim has tasked us with, when there's a homicide in Lehigh County, either Mr. Martin or myself go out to every homicide, and members of the task force do the same thing. And the Homicide Task Force goes out to any municipality and, in conjunction with the local police departments, investigate the homicide. And so we are involved, the District Attorney's Office is involved from the beginning in the investigation through the end of prosecution, the trial, and sentencing. And we do a pretty good job here, and it's a soup to nuts in conjunction with the local authorities. And we've had a tremendous amount of success. And as I indicated, the detectives we have bring a lot of experience to the table with over 180 years of experience. I would say that this year alone, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective on this issue, but we've only had 5 homicides in Lehigh County. We're very fortunate. Of those homicides, 4 have been drawn to a conclusion, resulting in arrests. In 3 cases arrests have been made in 3 of the cases. One case, the District Attorney Martin has determined it was a justifiable shooting, meaning that Jim Martin reviews cases, and where there's, in Pennsylvania, you're justified to use deadly force if deadly force is used upon you. So in one of the cases, it was ruled a justified shooting. And so of the 5 cases, homicides we've had so far this year, the most recent case is still outstanding and under investigation, and hopefully we'll be able to resolve that expeditiously. The other thing I'd like to talk about, shifting gears, is to other programs that we do here. And one of the programs, the other hat that I wear, it's called Team MISA. MISA stands for Mental Issues Substance Abuse. And it's Lehigh County's answer to a mental health court. In 2005, approximately 16 years ago, we created Team MISA, which is a collaborative think tank between all the all the agencies here within Lehigh County that deal with people coming into the criminal justice system with mental issues and usually co-occurring substance abuse problems. Mental issues are mental health issues, intellectual disability issues. And what it's designed to do is identify people early on in the process, identify individuals that are consumers or should be consumers of mental health or intellectual disability resources. Once they're identified early on, we evaluate and apply resources to them, whether it's medication, therapies, or treatment, whether it's in an incarcerated setting or in an outpatient setting. The ultimate goal is to make sure a consumer gets the treatment, services, and medication they need, protect the community, and when the person is reintegrated back to the community, the services are wraparound. So we reduce recidivism, we reduce the fact they're going to reoffend. thereby making the community and victims safer, and providing the ability of the individual charged with the crime to reintegrate to the community with proper treatment. The program is pretty phenomenal here in Lehigh County. We meet once a week, and the team consists of members from the District Attorney's Office, the Public Defender's Office, adult probation, various special units within the probation department, Lehigh County Drug and Alcohol, Lehigh County Intellectual Disability, aging, various private partnerships that provide treatment services. And I believe in the past 16 years, we've handled or resolved approximately 1,531 referrals of individuals in the criminal justice system with mental health or intellectual disability issues. And as I indicated, the goal is to get treatment to individuals that need that. And frankly, there are some individuals that are incarcerated, and that is the safest place for them and the safest place for the community. And there are some cases that we completely divert from the criminal justice system, and there's a whole bunch of stops in between. But it has been very successful in Lehigh County. Other counties have reviewed our model, and been very complimentary towards our model. As not only is it a very effective way to provide services and to protect our community, but another good selling point, if you're looking for a selling point in this program, is it's a communication network between resources and programs and people that are already within the county universe. It's just effectively communicating, effectively applying those resources. So the program itself is a zero-based budget program. So at the end of the day, it's not costing taxpayers any more dollars. So that's always a good thing when it comes to the county government. How can you effectively and efficiently use your resources and save money? And so Team MISA kind of checks off a lot of the boxes in terms of efficiently and effectively applying resources to people and programs that need it. And I think in my process, I failed to mention one of the participants that sit at the table. It's our Lehigh Valley Pretrial Services. And they do a fantastic job because they are one of the first gatekeepers of people getting arrested. We'll meet with pretrial services as we determine, using a risk assessment tools to determine what bail should be set. They do a fantastic job early on. And so Lehigh Valley Pretrial Services is part of our Team MISA, and it is a wonderful program. And the last program I want to talk about, to try to keep this under 5 minutes, and I'm not sure if I'm there yet, is our Veterans Mentoring Program. Our Veterans Mentoring Program is set up in a similar fashion to Team MISA. It's a collaborative effort, but it's really designed to address needs, issues, and concerns of veterans that are entering our criminal justice system. It's designed, the team meets again once a week to review individuals that are coming in the criminal justice system that have drug and alcohol issues, mental health issues, intellectual disability issues, PTS issues, but they are service connected. And so the team for our Veterans Mentoring Program consists of county drug and alcohol, county intellectual disability, county Veterans Affairs, Lehigh Valley Pretrial Services, the District Attorney's Office, the Public Defender's Office. And the most important thing, the component of the Veterans Mentoring Program, and I would fail to say that other than county Veterans Affairs, also the Federal Veterans Administration is involved. But the most important part of our VMP program is our mentors. Lehigh County has been blessed with a tremendous community of veterans that want to give more of themselves and their time and their experience. And so right now the program, there's 42 veteran mentors that assist us in reaching out and aiding and guiding our veterans that are involved in the criminal justice system. And so without those 42 mentors, I don't think the program works, and definitely doesn't work as well. But ultimately, our goal in the program is to identify the vets in need, provide services, evaluations, and treatment where necessary, and then in addition, pair them up with a mentor, someone who they can talk to and connect with. The mentor will help guide them through the criminal justice system or the VA or other treatment options. And again, it's just an amazing resource. It's it's a very unique human bonded connection between our veteran and the mentor. And we've seen amazing things on the human level, the human connectivity level. And to date, since the inception of that program in 2011, we've had 204 people go through the program and receive some form of service through our program. And in terms of success, I would say that on a human level, I've met with people in the program and their families And I know of one case where I've talked to the wife of a vet, and she shared experiences about the family strains and struggles, not financially, but with the PTSD and other mental health issues, that the family was falling apart. And the vet came to the program, was paired with a mentor, and after I would say a few short months or a few long months, but after a period of time, the connection was such, and the family actually stayed together, and they were at the brink of falling apart, getting divorced, but they stayed together. And so the end result was a family continued to strengthen their bond. So I thought it was amazing. And that has nothing to do, I think, with a lot of the bureaucracy on the county side, but has everything to do with the human connection on the mentor side. We've had mentors that aided individuals in starting businesses as they went through the program. So it's our VMP program is an amazing program. And if you're a veteran out there listening, thinking, I've got some extra time in my hand, please reach out to the district attorney's office. Right now we have 42 mentors. We're always looking for more. We can never have enough people with experience and compassion and willing to help. So the 42 we have are various diverse ages and backgrounds, and I thank all of them. So I will stop there because there are other people that have a lot of things to say. So I appreciate you listening to me tonight. I'm sorry if I talked a little longer than 5 minutes. But thank you. And the next person I believe on the list is Diane Morocovis. She is going to be talking about our grand jury system. And she's a little longer winded than I am, but I believe she has a PowerPoint presentation. And I think when I talked to her, she said she wanted to go about 2 hours, but I'm not sure. But I believe Diane will be next. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Hello, everyone. My name is Diane Morocovis. I'm a Chief Deputy District Attorney here in Lehigh County. I've been with the Lehigh County District Attorney's Office for approximately 19 years. I am the Supervising Attorney of Lehigh County's Investigating and Indicting Grand Jury. I do have a brief PowerPoint. Hopefully it will be brief. I'm just going to give an overview of the Investigating and Indicting Grand Jury here in Lehigh County. I'd first like to mention District Attorney Jim Martin started the investigating grand jury in Lehigh County in 2001. The indicting grand jury, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania resumed the indicting grand jury in Lehigh County in 2019. We've gotten permission from the Supreme Court to resume an indicting grand jury as well. Next slide. First thing I want to discuss the grand jury proceedings. All grand jury proceedings are both investigating and indicting are kept secret. Next slide. The grand jury is a valuable tool to the Lehigh County District Attorney's Office and in prosecuting criminal cases or in investigations to investigate possible criminal activities occurring here in Lehigh County. The grand jury has the power to compel the attendance of witnesses, compel the testimony of witnesses under oath. Especially this is important in cases where witnesses are uncomfortable testifying or coming forward or uncooperative. They can require the production through subpoena of documents, records, and other evidence. They have the power to issue a presentment and report, and a power to issue an indictment, which I will go over in a little bit more detail coming up further in the PowerPoint. Next slide. Selecting the grand jurors. Selecting the grand jury is a little different than how you would select a jury when you are prosecuting any other kind of trial, a jury trial. In essence, selecting the grand jury is actually pretty much a random selection. We bring in a panel of somewhere around 150 to 200 prospective jurors. And pretty much are limited to 3 basic questions to excuse any jurors. If there's a hardship where it is a sacrifice and a commitment to serve on the grand jury, if there's a hardship in your situation, you can be excused. If you have any physical or medical problems that would prevent you from sitting as a grand juror, or if there's any biases or prejudices that a person would hold that would prevent them from being a fair and impartial jury, they can be excused. And then after those jurors are excused for those particular reasons, it's pretty much random. We literally put the juror numbers in a box and we literally select the numbers from the box, and those 38 people will become the next panel of the investigating and indicting grand jury. Next slide. Lehigh County maintains a standing grand jury. The grand jury, once they're selected, will sit for a term of 18 months. At the end of the 18-month term, the grand jury can vote to extend its term for up to an additional 6 months. The grand jury cannot sit longer than 24 months. When 24 months is up, their term expires. Currently, we are in the 10th panel. They are about to expire the end of June. So we're hopefully we'll be able to select a new grand jury panel, the 11th panel, sometime in June or July. This particular panel and all panels, they will sit as an investigating and indicting grand jury. We only have one grand jury. They sit in both capacities. Next slide. The grand jury is composed of 23 permanent jurors and 15 alternate jurors. Whenever we hold a session, we usually do it twice a month. We have to have 15 permanent jurors in order to have a quorum to proceed and conduct business at that session. Next slide. When do we use the investigating grand jury? The grand jury is a very valuable tool, especially in complex cases where there's many exhibits or records or documents that we need to obtain. It's helpful in old or cold cases. It's very helpful when we have uncooperative witnesses who won't come in on their own to meet with us, to meet with police officers or detectives. We do all types of cases, our investigations or indictments in front of the grand jury, homicide cases, drug cases, elder abuse cases, child abuse, sex offenses, violent crimes. All types of cases have been brought through the grand jury through either investigating or indicting grand jury. Next slide. Who's allowed in the grand jury room when we have a session? First of all, the next slide. Obviously, the prosecutor, they're in the jury room. Next slide. The witness, if a witness is subpoenaed for a grand jury session, they have a right to choose if they want to have an attorney present with them. Unlike a trial, the attorney does not have the ability to object. They sit in the room with the witness, and if they wish to confer, they can go off the record and confer with their client, but they do not speak or present evidence or make any objections while the grand jury is questioning the witness. Next slide. There's a court reporter. Any communications between the prosecutor, witnesses, and the grand jury is all recorded by a court reporter. So any communications occurring in the grand jury room with the grand jury is being recorded. Next slide. Obviously, the jurors are in the room. The permanent and the alternate jurors attend all grand jury sessions. However, only the permanent members of the jury can vote if they're voting for an indictment or a presentment. Next slide. In addition, if we're doing an investigation or an indictment, the detective who's investigating the case is allowed in the room, and sometimes interpreters are necessary for any witnesses. DA personnel to assist with the grand jurors, and sheriff personnel if there's perhaps a witness who's in custody. They also are in the grand jury room. When a new panel is selected, various departments in Lehigh County are all sworn in for secrecy. The detectives, anyone that's attending a grand jury session would be sworn in for secrecy, including all the jurors. They do take an oath at the beginning of their term that they swear to keep all matters before the grand jury secret. Next slide. As far as the investigating grand jury, a case begins when the district attorney files a notice of submission of a case. And in that situation, the district attorney would ask the grand jurors to investigate, or we inquire into what we believe is possible criminal activity occurring in Lehigh County. And then the ADA who's handling the case would proceed to present evidence, whether it be testimony from witnesses, documents, records, would be brought before the grand jury during that investigation. And at the conclusion of the investigation, next slide, the grand jury can vote to issue a presentment, which is recommending that the district attorney file charges against one or more individuals. Next slide. The members of the grand jury can issue a report, which is basically recommending that legislative, regulatory, administrative, and/or institutional changes should be made to address problems identified during their investigation. Next slide. Or the grand jury can vote, or they can vote actually to decline to issue a presentment or a report. Next slide. The indicting grand jury is different than an investigating grand jury in that the investigating grand jury is you're doing the investigation part. Someone has not been charged yet. No one has been arrested on a crime. The difference is the indicting grand jury. The indicting grand jury is utilized after someone has been arrested for a crime or after a criminal complaint has been filed. The indicting grand jury is only used in cases where there's witness intimidation occurring, or witness intimidation has occurred or is likely to occur. The assistant DA will file a motion with the supervising judge of the grand jury, which is Judge Marks. The supervising judge will review the motion, and if the judge finds that there's probable cause that there's witness intimidation occurring, has occurred, or is likely to occur, the motion is granted, and the assistant DA can proceed with the case with an indictment through the grand jury. Next slide. When the assistant DA proceeds by indictment rather than preliminary hearing, basically the grand jury will sit as a magisterial district judge, so to speak. The indictment is in lieu of a preliminary hearing, and after the motion is granted by the supervising judge, the case should be presented before the grand jury within 21 days of the date of the order, unless the defendant waives the grand jury proceedings or the ADA then elects to proceed with a preliminary hearing as opposed to the indictment, and then that would be in front of a court of common pleas judge. Next slide. The assistant DA would present evidence to the grand jury during the indictment process, and based on the evidence that the grand jury receives, they will determine whether or not the assistant DA has presented a prima facie case, which is basically that an offense has been committed and the defendant has committed that offense. If the grand jury then issues an indictment, thereafter the district attorney can file a criminal information, which is the formal charging document that's filed for that case. If the grand jury, the indicting grand jury finds that there is not a prima facie case presented, they can decline to do an indictment. Next slide. That's just a brief overview of the grand jury process here in Lehigh County. I'll open it up if anyone has any questions regarding the grand jury process.
Okay, so now we're going to open the floor to questions regarding the grand jury process. So if you have a question regarding the grand jury process for Diane today, please raise your hand if you're joining us by computer, or *9 if you're joining us by telephone. Okay, it looks like we have one question from Lark Kurtz. Lark, I am going to give you the floor to speak. You have at least 1 minute to ask your question. Oh, looks like you put your hand down, Lark. If you would like to ask your question, please raise your hand. If not, we will be moving on. Okay, we're going to move on to the next presenter if there's no other questions. And if you want to rethink your question and circle back around, if there's time at the end of the presentation, we can certainly do that. Diane, thank you so much for presenting on the grand jury this evening. I don't see any other questions on the floor. So I'm going to now pass it off to Kim. And looks like Kim has a special guest with us this evening. Kim, the floor is yours.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Kimberly Silvestri. I'm the Victim Witness Coordinator for the Lehigh County District Attorney's Office. I've been working in victim services for over 20 years. I've been working specifically for the DA's office for almost 10. The unit's rounded out by 2 other advocates, Emily Johnson, who is also our restitution specialist, and Kimberly Bloom. We also have another guest that I'll bring out later. She's waking up from a nap, and if you hear snoring, it's not me, it's her. So what our unit does is we assist victims in any crimes that come through the district attorney's office, from DUI to theft, domestic violence cases, sexual assault, both child and adult, and homicide. Our unit provides services which can span years. So we start working with victims at the preliminary hearing, and then we provide services during that time and up until trial or a guilty plea, during court hearings and after sentencing. While the unit serves new victims as cases enter the system, it also continues to offer services to victims of crime that have occurred many years ago. An example of the longevity of the relationship between members of the unit and victims occurs with those impacted by cases related to PCRA hearings and appeals issues. And we also do parole notifications. So even after somebody's been sentenced, we are still in touch with that victim and working in conjunction with the Office of the Victim Advocate in Harrisburg to let people know about parole coming up. Typically, we provide services to about 4,000 victims a year. And again, that can be in both current cases and old cases. And with that, we're providing over about 8,000 services per year. So what kind of services do we provide? Well, when you're a victim in Lehigh County, you'll get a lot of mailings from us. So one of the things you're going to get is a restitution claim form. And we help out with that. We determine if you have out-of-pocket costs, which could be either medical costs or property damage. You're also going to get a victim impact form, a victim input form, which also you can indicate if you would like some input in what sentencing, if there's going to be a guilty plea prior to, like if the case is going to resolve outside of a trial, excuse me. And one of the most important forms you're going to get is a victim impact form, where you have a voice in the case and you can provide a statement as to how the case affected you and what you would like to see happen. Throughout the calendar year, the unit also engages in training in order to provide the most effective assistance that we can to individuals that we work with. Trainings include such topics and changes in new legislation relating to victims' rights, LGBTQ issues, updates and changes to restitution rulings, elder abuse issues, human trafficking, sex offender registration and notification, updates, domestic violence, and even animal cruelty issues, which we deal with. So you're also going to get a victim witness handbook from us, which is also going to contain the victim's bill of rights. So as a victim, some of your rights are to get information about services to help you, be told of important court actions and proceedings, to have a family member, victim advocate, or another person go with you to public criminal proceedings, to tell the district attorney's office what you think about the possibility of reducing or dropping any charges or changing of a plea, to write a victim impact statement that a judge can consider when sentencing the person, to recover your losses, to be told when an offender is being released, and to get help preparing, submitting, and following up on assistance to claims with victims' compensation in Harrisburg. So in 2017, Ramona, come here. Come on up. Come on up. We have a new addition to our unit. Come on, come on, come on. This is Ramona. I don't know if you can all see her. She's a little black lab. She's a comfort dog that we use to help victims. Ramona has worked with hundreds of victims in the system. She's worked in many, many sexual assault cases, both child and adult. She's worked, assisted victims in homicide cases, and she even worked in an arson case with a victim. Can you look at the camera? So Ramona does things like accompanies victims to meetings that we have with district attorneys. She goes to court. She'll sit under the witness stand, and the victim can kind of reach down, pet her. She's kind of just there to serve as a comfort and provide support. So I don't know if everybody can see her or not. I'm trying to get her in there. In 2020, we created a book for a children's coloring book, which features Ramona. And it also explains to kids about the court system. I don't know if you can all see that. And helps explain what they can expect when they have to come to court. So that was done in 2020. I also think it's important to note that my unit also works in conjunction with other victim service agencies, both Crime Victims Council, Turning Point, and also VAST. Got it?
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Ramona. So now we're going to move on to our next presenter. We have Matt Falk. He's going to be talking about special offenses and the Chief Child Advocacy Center. Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. My name is Matthew Falk. I supervise the special offense unit, and I apparently drew this short straw today because I have to follow Ramona. So the special offenses cases, you can think of them like if you've ever seen Law and Order SVU, these are the kinds of cases that we're talking about. And if you want to take a moment to think about what we're asking these victims to do, we're asking them to get up in court and talk about the worst experience of their life in front of total strangers. And so it's a really hard thing that we ask them to do. When I teach at the police academy, one of the ways I try to teach empathy for this type of thing is I do a thought experiment with the police cadets. And I'll ask you to sort of imagine your last sexual experience. And now imagine getting up in front of total strangers, people that you've never met before, and having to talk about it. And it's not just a matter of having to talk about it. It's imagine having someone like me ask you all kinds of questions about it. I'm going to ask you about every little detail. Imagine having to describe what you're wearing, or what the other person was wearing, or how it started, or how much you had to drink, or you know, what was said to you, or what you said back, what kind of positions you were in. Now imagine someone else getting up and asking you even more questions about that, asking you why you did something or why you didn't do something. And usually when we're doing that at the academy, everybody can realize, you know, how uncomfortable that is. And for the thought experiment, you know, usually when I'm talking to the cadets at the academy, their last sexual experience was a pleasant one. In our cases, in the cases that we're dealing with, it wasn't a pleasant experience. It was usually the worst thing that ever happened to them. And not only do they have to get up and talk about it in front of strangers, we ask them to get up and talk about it in front of strangers and describe everything in incredible detail. And not only do they have to do that, they have to get up and do it in front of the person who did this to them. And so that's a really hard thing that we ask these people to do. And sometimes it's not adults, and a lot of times it's children, and they have to do it about a family member. And it's really hard and really traumatic. And so one of the things that we try to do in special offenses is to try to reduce the trauma of these victims as much as possible. And one of the ways we do that is through the Child Advocacy Center. And before I talk to you a little bit about the CAC, let me talk to you about what we used to do before there was a CAC. Because when we would have these types of cases that would come in, if you have a child sexual assault victim, that child would have to be interviewed by Children and Youth Services. So Children and Youth Services would go and talk to them. They'd probably have to have a medical exam, so they'd have to go in, find a doctor. The doctor would talk to them. That exam is fairly intrusive as well. Then we'd have to have the detectives talk to them too. And so now we have a young child who's been horribly traumatized, and they have to go through, 3 separate interviews. Along with that, everybody's sort of doing their own investigation. Children and Youth is doing their investigation. The detectives are doing their investigation, and nobody really knew what the other side was doing. Now we have a Child Advocacy Center, or a CAC, located at Lehigh Valley Hospital at Cedar Crest, where we're all co-located. We have investigators from the Allentown Police and from the DA's office there. There's children and youth caseworkers there, and the medical team is there. And so it's all in one place. We also have a special forensic interviewer, and this is a person who's been trained specifically to interview children and to interview them in the least traumatic way possible and the most correct legal way, so there's no types of improper questioning. The goal there is for one interview. And so what will happen at the CAC is we'll bring the victim in, and they will meet with the forensic interviewer. And this is a recorded interview. So our forensic interview is interviewing the child, and usually in a back room, we'll have the caseworkers and the detective. And so there's not 3 interviews, there's 1. And because we're co-located at the hospital, either right before, usually it's right after that forensic interview, the child can go right and get a medical exam. So it's sort of one-stop shopping. Again, because we're all co-located there, everybody sort of knows what everybody else is doing. So we're not reinventing the wheel, and we're making sure that children and youth isn't going to somehow interfere with our investigation. And if we need to find a doctor, we're not chasing down a doctor to try and find them. And the doctors at the CAC are always available to us, so we have everything's all together, and so it's just much a more integrated investigation. Look, these cases are always difficult. Most of them are family related, and they're highly emotional. Most defendants in these types of cases have a real hard time admitting what they did. And even with all the trauma reducing efforts, and just to sort of jump back to that, and I forgot to even mention Kim and Ramona. Kim and Ramona are great. They come in with us, with me in almost every interview, especially with a child. And sometimes you can see just a child who's nervous and upset, and the moment Ramona jumps up and sits down next to them and they start petting Ramona, you can just see them calm down. And in fact, I don't know if Kim said this, she probably did, but during the COVID lockdown, Kim and I met with a victim on Zoom, and Ramona had her own square up there too, because one of the things our victim wanted to do was, check in with Ramona. And that's usually always the first question that we get is, I'll come in, but I want to make sure Ramona's there with me. And so it's just been very helpful. But even with that said, these cases are very traumatic for the victims. And for me, I just feel lucky that I get to work with all these brave and courageous people. So I am ready to take questions now, Laura, if anybody has anything.
Okay, great. We are going to open the floor for Matt. If anyone has any questions, about the Special Offenses and Child Advocacy Center, please raise your hand or use *9 if you have a telephone. And again, we are taking questions from Matt if anyone has any questions regarding the Child Advocacy Center or Special Offenses. Okay, last call for questions. Again, that is raise your hand if you're joining us by computer or *9 by telephone. I don't see any questions from the floor. Matt, do you have any final remarks?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a lot of great information for us to take in. The next person we have on the docket is
Hi, Laura. I think you froze a little, but I think you were introducing me. I'm Chief Deputy District Attorney Bethany Zampogna, and I supervise the Gang Prosecution Unit here in the District Attorney's Office. District Attorney Martin started the Gang Unit in 2013 in response to an uptick that we had in gang violence and the formation of the Lehigh Valley Regional Intelligence and Investigative Center, which you heard him mention earlier. And those two things work in conjunction. The Regional Intelligence and Investigative Center contains information, as DA Martin indicated. It's a coming together of information from various police departments and other agencies that is in a searchable format. And there's also gang intelligence that is gathered and housed there in a program that, as DA Martin said, HSI, Homeland Security, is looking to replicate on a large scale. These documents and information allow us to determine what individuals are at risk of retaliation if a gang violence spike does begin. It helps us to identify what areas particular gangs may be associated with, and it helps us to deal with gang violence before it gets out of control completely, as often these events escalate. The Lehigh County Gang Intelligence has indicated that there are over 60 separate gangs operating in and around Lehigh County. These gangs consist not only of local gangs, but national gangs, and often you will see interplay between those where there is violence amongst them, and you also will see them working together. The different gangs that we have also have within them different groups called sets. So if you think of baseball, for example, this time of year, you may have the National League, and that could be a gang. And underneath that gang, you'll have sets, which are the different teams, the Mets, the Phillies. But in this case, we're talking about different types of blood sets or Crip sets, and they all have different names and hierarchies. One of the things that we have noticed is that these gangs have no longer a very centralized and controlled operation. They are consisting of very young individuals who act impulsively and often fail to have any direct supervision that really can control them. It makes some of the old methods of dealing with gangs very difficult to put into play in the current environment. So how do we do it? Well, we have a gang task force that consists of individuals from various agencies and all of the local police departments. And we share information, and we gather together monthly and have meetings and share information about what gangs are doing in the various areas around Lehigh County. And as part of that, one of the things that we do is look at where have there been some shots fired, for example. Is that associated with the location according to information from the Regional Intelligence and Investigative Center? Can we put more patrols there? Can we speak to people who are associated with those gangs? Is there a way we can broker peace and try to get these under control? And we discuss that, as I said, with all of the agencies monthly. And then we have breakout weekly groups with different jurisdictions within Lehigh County, such as the city of Allentown or other areas. The meetings that we have don't just consist of investigative agencies, but also criminal justice agencies such as juvenile probation and county probation and state probation and parole, as well as the Department of Corrections. All of these parties have information about gangs and intelligence about what gangs are doing in the Lehigh Valley. And so we take information from all of that and compile it in order to deal with the problems that we do have in the area. What kind of crimes are gangs committing, you might ask? All types. We now have a number of gangs that are moving into what we would call white collar crimes, such as credit card fraud. They are engaged in human trafficking, often controlling women or victims through the use of heroin or other controlled substances and preying upon them as they sell them for sex. The other things that we see them doing are, of course, traditional old school, we would call them, gang money gathering operations, such as dealing in drugs and guns. So we continue to see all of those types of crimes occurring in Lehigh County and committed by gang members. They also assault each other, and sometimes, sadly, they assault individuals through robberies and attempt to gain money in that fashion. What we do in the gang prosecution unit is we try to form relationships with gang members. It helps us in the future. Why? Because today's defendant is tomorrow's victim, is the next day's witness. And you have to remember that when dealing with individuals, that you are going to see them in all different aspects of the criminal justice system and in the various roles. These individuals are also unwilling to cooperate and talk. There is a code of silence. We live in a don't snitch society. The grand jury that you heard Diane Morocovis speak about is an amazing tool that we've used to solve many crimes that otherwise would go unsolved. We need that cloak of secrecy to assure our witnesses that they will be protected. We have to take special precautions with the information that is given to us to prosecute these crimes, often getting court orders and limitations on how and how far information is disseminated on these cases. We don't want to see police reports on Facebook because then the witnesses are harassed. And let's talk about the witness intimidation. That is a very difficult thing to have people overcome. You, when you're dealing with a gang, are dealing with a far different situation than an individual offender. If an individual offender is in either out on bail or incarcerated and has a provision that doesn't permit contact with the witness or the victim, that can easily be supervised, and you can make sure that victim or witness remains free of intimidation. You can't do that when you have a gang, because where do you stop naming people, right? And so you have to make sure you take these precautions and use information that you have through the gathering of gang intelligence to determine who are the likely individuals to be engaged in witness intimidation on behalf of the individuals charged with crimes. You also need to form the relationships with these gang members in order to have them trust you and tell you accurate information about what has happened and what is planned. For example, in 2012, prior to the formation of the gang unit, we had a war that occurred in Lehigh County between a local gang and a national gang. That war resulted in 12 people being shot, some of them more than once. 2 individuals under the age of 20 were paralyzed, and 2 others aged 16 and 17 were killed. And during that 1-year period, there was at least 1 daytime shooting a day that was tied to this gang war. But without any individuals cooperating and without any gang intelligence system in place before the RIC, we were unable to deal with that situation. The police were unable to do that. Ultimately, through cooperation, the gang task force put together, working together with all of those different parties, probation and parole, the police departments, our office, the homicide task force, utilizing the grand jury to investigate these cases, we were ultimately able to make arrests in most of those violent acts, including both of the homicides, and have successful prosecutions. We wouldn't have been able to do that without the Regional Intelligence and Investigation Center, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without the Gang Task Force and the relationships that were built over time by having the same group of people deal repeatedly with members of those gangs. If they're arrested for disorderly conduct, one of us is going to be there from the gang unit. If they're arrested for homicide, one of us from the gang unit will deal with that as well. And so the relationship is built over time, and they get to know that we will always be there no matter what happens. As I said, these meetings that we have at the Gang Task Force occur monthly. We do have secret information. They are not open to the public. The information is not shared outside criminal justice agencies, but it does permit us to determine, again, where there may be violent individuals or spikes of crime to be expected. It allows the police departments to more strategically use their resources. And again, our goal is more easily met, which is to lower the instance of gang violence. We also use the gang intelligence from the Regional Investigative Intelligence and Investigative Center, I should say, to use at sentencing. The judge needs to know if an individual is a gang member, many different things. Should programming be part of their sentence, such as cognitive behavioral therapy? Should there be restrictions on what places they can go? So for example, if you're sentencing a member of a gang and a gang hangs out in a certain block of the street, one of the ways that you can help that person along their course of rehabilitation is prohibit them from being in that geographic area. So it's our job to alert the court that this is a hot spot and that this person, while they're under supervision of the court on probation or parole, should not be in that location. We also need to know, should this person stay in a local facility or should they go to a state prison if they're going to be incarcerated? We've given many young gang members who ordinarily would be in state prison an opportunity in county incarceration and with supervision by our county gang task force and the probation officers that work with them. And what happens then is people stay on top of them who have relationships with them, and we give them an opportunity to turn it around and to break those ties. Because frankly, as long as gang members remain tied to the streets, they remain tied to the crime. So we tend to try to break the ties to the gang as the primary way of rehabilitation. I have been a prosecutor since 1999. I'm old as dirt, I like to say, except then DA Martin gets mad at me because he might be a smidgen older. And I have done cases first beginning with the running drug task force, and now I run a gang task force. People say to me, why would you do that? I don't think there's a greater place to make a difference in young people's lives than to try to have them break that tie with the streets and turn it around while they still can. And I hear Matt talk about his victims, and I have such respect and admiration, and frankly, I couldn't do it, what he does. But my opportunity to work with these young individuals and attempt to turn them around, be the person that eventually they trust to take something into court, to trust citizens, to hear them and not judge that their activity might not have been the best, but they still shouldn't have been shot, for example. I take that as something that I'm very proud to do. These victims don't have voices. These gangs live on and thrive on intimidation, and they need people that will show them that that doesn't work and that you can trust the criminal justice system to come forward and help anybody. And if the law protects, if the law fails to protect everyone, it protects no one, as I like to say. So we try to get these, as I said, today's defendant, tomorrow's victim, the next day's witness, to trust us, and we stay involved as much as we can. And with that, does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Bethany. So right now at this time, we are going to open the floor for Bethany. If anyone has any questions regarding the gang unit or the drug task force, please raise your hand or press *9. Again, we are accepting questions for Bethany regarding the gang unit or the drug task force. Okay, it looks like we have one question from Jan. Jan, I'm going to ask you to keep your question under a minute as I unmute your mic. Once you're done asking your question, I will give the floor back to Bethany. Okay. And Jen, you now have the floor. You may unmute your mic.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you, Bethany. What an interesting thing to hear about. My question is, I've heard a little bit about promised neighborhoods being consisting of people who are former members of gangs who are learning to give back to the community. I wonder if you have any interface with them or any comments about that group or what they do. Thank you.
Absolutely. I am familiar with that group, and it's one of a number of groups that we work with that if they have anything to offer to assist with a certain case, they do meet with particular individuals who are gang members trying to get out of the life. And often they will come to court with individuals, and they will offer to be involved in part of the supervision programming that the court puts in place. I do think that it's a great plan to have people that can know the streets and work with the individuals to try to break that tie, and who've been successful in doing so themselves, to work with defendants. And part of what we want these defendants to see is that there is hope, that there are other options. And it's difficult for them to see that sometimes unless they have it live and in front of them, someone who's been through it and lived to tell the story on the other side. And so we're always open to having any agency that can offer something like that come to the table. And if anybody has any suggestions, we're always happy to hear that.
Thank you, Bethany. So now we're going to move on to our next presenter. We're going to speak with Chief Deputy District Attorney Paul Bernardino. Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you, Laura. My name is Paul Bernardino. I'm a Chief Deputy District Attorney working for Mr. Martin. I'm presently assigned to the DUI Prosecution Unit with the office. There are 3 attorneys in our office who handle DUI prosecutions. On an average year, we handle about 1,800 cases. This past year, despite COVID, we handled 1,200 cases from beginning to end. About a third of our DUI cases fall under the category of a DUI drug or DUI prescription medication case, with the other cases being DUI alcohol case. Generally speaking, when the case comes in, we handle the cases in a special DUI court, which meets 3 times a month. That court is presided over by Judge Reichley. We also have preliminary hearings twice a month in a specially designated DUI central court system. As one of the tools that we use in prosecution of DUI cases in Lehigh County there is a Lehigh County Regional DUI Task Force. This task force is responsible for establishing and manning DUI checkpoints and conducting DUI roving enforcement patrols within the county. In the DUI task force, we were happy to say that in the year 2019, we had done so well in performing our functions and duties that the Pennsylvania Highway Safety Office recognized us as the #1 DUI task force unit in the state, and we received the award for the #1 impaired driving project of the year. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we had to suspend for safety reasons conducting DUI checkpoints. But as things turn around, we hope to bring those functions back together again. Another one of our functions in the DUI unit is the prosecution and investigation, or I should say the overseeing and the investigations of serious motor vehicle crashes, including fatal motor vehicle accidents. Just as Mr. Luksa and Mr. Martin are called on homicide by vehicle cases, I'm called whenever there is a serious motor vehicle crash with serious injuries or a fatal motor vehicle crash within the county. At that point, I will respond to the scene and with investigators, work with the investigators to find out whether or not we have actually an accident on our hands or a criminally prosecutable crash. It takes a lot to determine what goes on during a crash. Unlike most criminal cases where Joe did this or Bill did that and he used this instrumentality to commit the crime, crash cases are usually proving the negative, or disproving the negative, I should say. We have to, in our investigation, determine that there wasn't a defect in the road that caused the crash. There wasn't a defect within the vehicle that caused the crash. The weather conditions didn't cause the crash. The lighting conditions didn't cause the crash. All these different factors, including other drivers on the road, they didn't cause the crash. And if we're able to prove the negative and prove that none of these things happened, and that the driver of the motor vehicle is in fact the person responsible for the crash, we still have to answer the question of whether or not their conduct was just accidental or criminal. In order, and that's a very, very difficult thing to do. At times, it could be very straightforward because the crashes aren't that complicated. Other times, we could have crashes that are very complicated and can take several months to conclude our investigation. Recognizing that fact and recognizing that accident reconstruction is a skill set that needs to be used all the time, District Attorney Martin formed the Lehigh County Crash Reconstruction Teams in 2019. This reconstruction team, or as we like to be referred to as recon unit, it's composed of 30 appointed county detectives. These specially appointed county detectives are drawn from several departments. All of them are accident reconstructionists from anywhere from 1 year experience to 20 years of experience. They are drawn from Upper Macungie Township, South Whitehall Township, Upper Saucon Township, Fountain Hill Borough, Emmaus, Salisbury, and Catasauqua. There are other departments that don't provide officers to the unit, but the job of this county reconstruction team is for those departments that don't have reconstruction teams, should they have a fatal or serious motor vehicle crash in their jurisdiction, it just takes a phone call. And depending on the complexity of the crash, they will have anywhere from 3 to 30 detectives working their crash scenes, including myself, with them overseeing the investigation. This gives us a lot of tools, especially with cases involving hit and runs, where we'll have a hit and run accident with a fatality or just with serious bodily injury. We're capable of drawing on multiple departments and multiple police officers to canvass an area. Thank goodness we haven't had to use that capability, but it's something that we're capable of doing. It also alleviates a stress that was normally placed on the Pennsylvania State Police with their cars or their reconstruction team. At the time of the formation of this unit, of our unit, I should say, the Pennsylvania State Police had a manpower issue and only had one reconstructionist covering 3 counties. With this unit, Mr. Martin made it possible for us to cover all the jurisdictions and cover it effectively, and bring a lot of experience and also technology to bear on these cases. There's a lot of equipment that's involved. We use survey equipment, laser survey tools. We also read a lot of electronic equipment, especially the black boxes contained within motor vehicles. All in all, the whole focus of the group is to turn around, conduct a thorough investigation, turn over every leaf. So when ultimately we're asked, was this an accident or was this a crime? We're able to say with fair certainty, we're able to answer that question. So thank you for listening. If there are any questions, I'll be willing to answer them at this time.
Thank you, Paul. For the sake of time, though, we do have a few people who have to get through presentations. So we're going to ask to hold off until questions till the end, if there is time left. But thank you again for that. That was really informative. We are now going to move on next on the agenda to Senior Deputy District Attorney Edward Muir, who is going to be speaking on domestic violence. Edward, you have the floor.
My name is Edward Muir. I, as Laura said, am a Senior Deputy District Attorney with Lehigh County. I'm the Supervisor of the Domestic Violence Unit. I've been with the office for about 12 and a half years now. So I want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the lighthearted subject of domestic violence. We hear a lot about domestic violence in the news these days. We constantly are seeing on the news people being arrested, athletes, entertainers, politicians, famous people that we recognize being charged with domestic violence crimes. So, what is domestic violence? Domestic violence cases involve allegations of assaultive or threatening behavior involving persons who are family or household members. There's a legal definition as to what constitutes a family or household member, but generally speaking, domestic violence crimes are committed between spouses, intimate partners, or family members. So those are the people that we deal with in these cases. In Lehigh County, we get domestic violence cases out of every single jurisdiction within the county. Domestic violence affects people of all socioeconomic statuses, all ages, all races, ethnicities, all sexual orientations. We get cases involving every type of person that you can imagine. So it's not something isolated to any type of group of people. At this point in time, our domestic violence unit is comprised of 3 full-time assistant district attorneys, myself and 2 others, and also 2 county detectives. And both those detectives are retired Allentown police officers. The 3 attorneys in the unit are charged with prosecuting all misdemeanor and felony non-homicide domestic violence cases in which the alleged victim is an adult. The 2 detectives in our unit are tasked with a variety of things. Specifically, they aid in domestic violence investigations. They locate and meet with witnesses and victims. They act as liaisons with police departments throughout the county, and they compile and maintain our domestic violence files and keep statistics for us. Now, in the world of domestic violence in Lehigh County, things changed somewhat in the year 2014. Things changed in the manner in which the court handled domestic violence cases and also the manner in which this office handled them. At that time, domestic violence cases were, in the Court of Common Pleas of the trial level of court, were consolidated with a single judge. And at that point in time, back in 2014, that was Judge Kelly L. Bannock, who's now retired. So instead of each judge handling a portion of domestic violence cases, Judge Bannock handled all of them. Within the DA's office, District Attorney Martin expanded the domestic violence unit from a single attorney to 2 attorneys, myself being one of them. We were at that point in time tasked with handling all domestic violence cases from initiation through trial. Previous to that, the single domestic violence prosecutor, who understandably was overwhelmed with a lot of cases, would handle our domestic violence cases at the preliminary hearing stage. And then those cases would be transitioned to a different prosecutor who would handle the case in the Court of Common Pleas, either to a guilty plea or to a trial. The new system in our office, where we, myself and the other 2 DAs, handle the cases from initiation through trial, has been very important because it's given our victims a single point of contact throughout the whole case. It's given them somebody that they know they can reach out to, who knows about the case and who's going to be handling it from start to finish. It's enabled us to establish a much better rapport with people because we know them and they know us. And it's we've had a lot better continuity in terms of handling our cases. And I think this is especially important over the last year, where with COVID, like all cases, and probably even more so, domestic violence cases have tended to stretch out for long periods of time. They're not getting resolved quickly because courts have been postponed or canceled repeatedly. So these cases, in the best of times, can take months, if not years at times, to handle from start to finish. And that's only gotten worse. So it's important that these people who are victims have somebody that they know is looking out for them. So just briefly, in terms of the nuts and bolts of what we do, typically if someone in the county is charged with a misdemeanor or felony crime of domestic violence, our detectives receive police reports, evidence, things like photographs, written statements, recorded statements, medical records. We gather that information, and we compile a file. When the case gets scheduled for court, and the first stage is our preliminary hearing, a DA is assigned to the case. That DA then attempts to reach out and make contact with all of our victims. We try to reach them by phone. If that's not possible, at times we'll send our detectives out to try to make contact with them at home. And we make every effort we can to try to reach people. We want to be able to talk with them before our preliminary hearings so we can explain the criminal process to them. Many people are totally unfamiliar with how the criminal process works, understandably. They're upset because they've been victimized by someone who's close to them. And so we like to be able to explain to them, here's how the process works, and to be able to discuss with them potential ways the case can be handled. We want to get a sense from the victim, what is it that they want to see happen? What is it that they think would benefit the defendant? In terms of, are there issues that need to be addressed? A lot of people that we deal with in these types of cases, people have addiction issues, they have anger management issues, they have control issues, they have mental health issues. And a lot of times our victims really don't want to see somebody in jail. They want to see somebody get help for the problems they need, because these, again, are people that are close to them, family members, loved ones, spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends. So we like to meet with them, we talk to them, try to get a sense of what could be our plan for the case. Now, ultimately, we can have a great plan, but it's up to a defendant whether they want to accept responsibility for what they did. And if they don't, we have a burden of proving that they're guilty of what is alleged. So we will meet with victims when we can. We have our preliminary hearing. At a preliminary hearing, three things can happen. People can sometimes plead guilty to crimes. We can have a hearing where typically the victim would testify about what happened, or we can work out a resolution at the next level of court where the case gets waived and the case continues to the Court of Common Pleas. At the Court of Common Pleas, the defendant can either plead guilty or it can take a trial. Again, it can be a long process, and thankfully, very few cases typically end up at trial. Less than 5% of domestic violence cases end up in some sort of a trial. Our primary objective through this process is to protect our victims from future abuse. And again, this can, sometimes this can involve needing to incarcerate someone because they're a danger to a person or to society. But very often, if we can address the problems that a particular defendant might have, that's what our victims want to see happen. Now, we have a lot of challenges that I'll just briefly describe in dealing with these cases. As with Attorney Zampogna with her gang violence cases, we have a lot of victim intimidation. That can be overt intimidation in terms of threatening our victims, threatening them with violence, calling victims from jail, and threatening them if they show up to court. But it can also be, and probably more typical, is how defendants try to manipulate their victims. These are people that are close. A lot of times these defendants are very skilled at manipulating their victims. And they'll try to manipulate them into not wanting to pursue these cases. We have a lot of victims who are understandably concerned for a variety of reasons about how cooperating in a prosecution can negatively impact their life. That can be negative impacts in terms of on their finances, on their housing, childcare, perhaps mental, emotional, physical support the defendant gives to them. A lot of people have a very difficult time understandably rectifying the fact that they care or love this person strongly, and yet they've been harmed by or abused by this person, and they have a hard time rectifying these two things. We, again, deal with both victims and defendants with serious mental health issues, addiction issues, anger management issues. We also have a fair number of people who are transient, and that can be difficult. So in terms of just briefly our statistics, we average over the last 3 years about 723 cases, criminal cases a year. About 80% of those are for misdemeanor crimes. That's typically simple assaults, reckless endangerments, terroristic threats, stalking. About 20% of our cases are felonies. That's attempted homicides, aggravated assaults, strangulations, and firearms offenses. And I will note that strangulation, when it became a standalone crime in 2017, has really ballooned. In 2020, between 2018 and 2020, we had about 68 strangulation cases a year. And that's obviously a very deadly thing. Briefly, I'll just note we work closely with our partners, Crime Victims Council, Turning Point, and Probation. And you know, these are very difficult cases. We try to do what we can to hold offenders accountable and to you know, improve the situation of our victims. And I think we've had some pretty good success doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. That was great. We are going to move on for the sake of time to our next presenter. We have on the agenda Assistant District Attorney Ramona. My apologies if I mispronounced that, sorry. But we are going to be going over elder abuse, and I believe you have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to put this on the screen now.
Good evening, everyone. Ramona, you got it correct, Laura. From the
Okay, good.
Attorney's. We could actually skip the PowerPoint. I'm going to skip a couple of slides because I know the presenters after me have a lot of useful information. So if it's easier, that's fine.
Not a problem.
Again, Ramona, I've been in the District Attorney's office for almost 5 years now. 2.5 of those years, I've been handling the elder abuse cases alongside Heather Gallagher, who's going to be speaking after me. Just going to tell you quickly about the history of the Elder Abuse Task Force and a little bit about what we do. The task force was created in 2007 by District Attorney Jim Martin due to an increase in cases and the desire to work collectively with different resources in the community. The Elder Abuse Task Force started off, I think, with approximately 4 members, and now we're up to about 50. Those members include local law enforcement agencies, aging and adult services, local citizens, the coroner's office, Lehigh County Human Resources, Orphans Court, major health networks, social service agencies, a lot of the financial institutions, including the Temple University Institute on Protective Services, the Law Department, the Department of Justice, and continuing care communities. The main goal of the Elder Abuse Task Force is to prosecute these cases and really just to prevent abuse and protect the vulnerable. We wanted to educate the community, and that's achieved by creating awareness and providing resources. The District Attorney's Office does that by attending senior events and presenting PowerPoint presentations to a lot of the health networks, which include a lot of nurses and social workers, and just overall working collaboratively with everyone who's interested in doing so. In 2015 and 2016, the Elder Abuse Task Force developed a resource guide and protocols. The guide is mainly geared towards sharing contact information and resources. And as you guys can imagine, not each case ends in criminal charges. So a lot of the time we're referring cases to the area agency of aging to get resources to these vulnerable clients. The Elder Abuse Task Force also created a checklist for local law enforcement to go through while they're conducting their investigations. And that is to ensure uniformity in responding and investigating the cases. The Elder Abuse Task Force has a great membership with the Lehigh Valley Gatekeepers. During that partnership, we are geared towards connecting at-risk older adults to services. And many of the resources that come through the Gatekeepers program are non-traditional referral sources. These are people who come in contact with older adults through work or their daily lives, and they go through a training program during which they're trained to recognize warning signs and red flags, and they understand the protocols for getting help and reporting these cases. Oftentimes, the reporting is done anonymously. The types of abuse that we typically see include physical, psychological, verbal, financial, emotional, sexual, neglect, and abandonment. And I just wanted to let everyone know that in 2017, and still current, the CDC reported that 1 in 10 Americans over the age of 60 that were living at home have experienced elder abuse. A few more alarming facts I just want to tell you guys about. In 2017, almost 16% of people over the age of 60 were subjected to some form of abuse, but only 1 in 24 cases were reported. Worldwide, 64% of staff in elder care institutions perpetrated some form of abuse. And these victims of this abuse are twice more likely to die than those who are not. And recently, the Area Agency on Aging reported that they have seen an over 250% increase in reports of need in the last 5 years. The types of charges that my office has filed recently: assault, thefts, and sexual crimes. Sorry, I'm trying to move quickly here. Some tips that I just like to get out to the general public: avoid telephone scams. I don't think I've gone a week without getting a call from some unknown number about a warranty program. We always try to notify people to avoid saying yes during those phone calls. Obviously, don't give out any of your personal information over the phone or on the internet. And be aware of mom and pop scams. There's a recent article in the Morning Call about these card cracking cases. If anyone has the time to go ahead and read about that, just be familiar that that's going on now. Check your bank statements, review your protection options with your banks, your insurance companies, and your credit card companies. And I always tell people to do this, even though I don't do it. And make sure you change your PIN numbers regularly and require identification that they check your license when you're using your credit cards. I did have a slide up with all the contact information of all the groups that we work with. But since I'm not using that PowerPoint, if anyone wants to call our office directly, I can provide that information. My information, also the aging and adult services information, Crime Victims Council, the local police department, and the Office of the Attorney General. Thank you.
Thank you, Rama. We are going to now move on to the next presenter. We have Chief of Administration and Chief of Appeals, Heather Gallagher. Heather?
Good evening, everyone. As Laura mentioned, my name is Heather Gallagher. I have been a prosecutor for just about 20 years now. I spent 7 years in the District Attorney's Office in Philadelphia and have been here in Lehigh County for about 13 years. I am currently Chief of Appeals and Administration. A big part of my job is handling the appellate process. In many cases, once the conviction is done, contrary to popular belief, the case is not over. In many cases, the time spent achieving the conviction, a lot more time is going to be spent on the appeal. Just to give you an idea, in 2017, we had 72 cases that were handled on appeal. Appeals in our office begin in the Superior Court and can also be in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Cases that go to the Pennsylvania Superior Court are heard by a 3-judge panel. These judges can be from anywhere throughout the state. They are elected officials. Some are appointed as senior judges. And those cases, first we file briefs, we do the research, and depending on the issues raised, we will brief those issues and occasionally go and argue the cases in front of the Pennsylvania Superior Court. Some of those cases then may go up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, who has discretionary review over the vast majority of criminal cases. If those cases are accepted for review, we will again brief the issue, file motions in that court, and argue that case between a 9-judge panel. In addition to the state appellate courts, sometimes we also have cases that are handled by our office in the federal courts. Many of the criminal cases, they have the right to appeal to the Pennsylvania Superior Court. They then have a discretionary appeal to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And they also have the option of then filing appeals at the U.S. District Court, federal courts. Those cases can then go to the Third Circuit and ultimately could be filing for discretionary review in the U.S. Supreme Court. Most of my job is reviewing the convictions, defending the convictions in court, addressing any allegations of trial court error. Once we get through all of those appeals, which are direct appeals, as Kim Silvestri, our victim witness advocate, mentioned, Sometimes we then have what's called post-conviction or PCRA hearings. That is a whole nother layer of appeal that once the person is typically finished with their direct appeals to the Supreme Court, Pennsylvania Superior Court and Supreme Court and federal courts, they may decide to file a PCRA appeal. That is typically where they're alleging perhaps that their attorney did something wrong, their attorney was ineffective, amongst other claims. It's a very distinct group of claims. That comes back to the Court of Common Pleas then, and by statute goes back to the same judge that heard the case to begin with. So as you can imagine, these cases can go on for years and years, depending on the crime and depending on the sentence that a defendant is serving after being convicted. We have cases where we have post-conviction relief act petitions being filed in cases that where the defendants were convicted in the 1990s or the early 2000s. Every time a defendant or their attorney files an appeal, our office reviews those and responds accordingly. Besides the appellate process, as was mentioned, I'm also chief of administration. Part of that responsibility, we review all the policies within the office and work with a lot of the police departments as far as their policies and so forth. So it's really a group dynamic and it's really a team effort. But a lot of times these cases, just when the convictions are over, these cases continue on. And a lot of times that's why I work closely with Kim Silvestri in notifying victims and explaining the process and that how long this can last and how long this can continue, depending on what is filed. And explaining the process that it can take years and years beyond the conviction, that the case will still be heard by a judge or reviewed by our office. So that's pretty much an overview of the appellate process. It's not nearly as exciting as some of the other things that happen in the office, but it's certainly a necessary part of the process and is something that, as I said, I've been doing for 20 years and hope to continue to do. But if anybody has any questions about the appeals process, I'll let you get on to the more interesting stuff that's following me here.
Thank you, Heather. We're going to move on to Mark, but we are going to have a segment at the end where we have a method for everyone to submit their questions because we are getting close to 8 o'clock. But Mark, the floor is yours. I'm going to introduce you right now. Everyone, this is Mark Garrett. He is the commanding officer of Lehigh County's Firearm and Tool Mark Laboratory. Mark?
Thank you. I'd like to give you a little background on myself. I went to Penn State, 4-year degree, 2 of them in engineering. Then I transferred to business, which I graduated with a business degree. After college, I spent 5 years in the social work field. Then I spent 1 year as a Reading police officer. I then got hired by the Pennsylvania State Police. My career was 27 years long. During that career, I was the firearms instructor for the Bethlehem Troop M for 6 years. And the last 11 years of my tour there, I was a firearm and tool mark examiner in their ballistics section. On August 8th of 2016, I was hired by Jim Martin to be the Lehigh County firearm and tool mark examiner in their ballistics lab. So my lab is a full-service firearm and tool mark laboratory with state-of-the-art equipment. The services that I provide are a forensic firearm examination, which includes identifying the make, model, caliber, serial number, the safeties, whether the safeties work or not, the length of the barrel, which is sometimes a legal issue, the type of rifling in the barrel, the direction of twist, the trigger pull weight, and I challenge it to a shock and drop test to see if it's going to discharge by means other than by pulling the trigger. I then test fire this weapon, this firearm, at least twice if it's a revolver, 4 times if it's a pistol. If I have a bullet for the bullet ID service, I will see if the bullet was discharged from the firearm that's submitted. If there's no firearm submitted, I will do bullet to bullet. I will tell you if the bullets were discharged from the same firearm or how many firearms were involved in the shooting or the incident. I will also be able to, hopefully be able to give you the caliber of the bullet. I will give you the number of lands and grooves, the type of rifling, the direction of twist, and if possible, a list of firearms. That's a software package the FBI has for investigative purposes. For cartridge case ID, I will identify the manufacturer of the cartridge case. I will see if the cartridge case matches to the firearm, or if the cartridge cases within the case match to each other, or how many firearms are involved. I do serial number and VIN restoration. I submit them to some physical tests, sanding and polishing, and some chemical tests depending on the type of metal involved. I do distance determination, see how far the muzzle of the firearm was in relationship to the target at the point of discharge. I do tool mark identification if there's a tool involved in cutting of a lock or breaking into a doorway or something. There's individual marks that I can look at and identify to a tool. I do trajectory analysis for bullets in flight, see if they were, what direction they were coming from. And the last thing I do is the cartridge cases that I have within a case, I submit them to a computer system called NIBIN, which is the National Integrated Ballistics Identification Network. It's a database that's nationwide, like APHIS is for fingerprints. This is for cartridge cases. So my lab is located in the Citronia Ambulance Building. It's located right next to the Lehigh County Coroner's Office. And from time to time, I get to go over there and identify bullets and things that happen within a body if the pathologist has a question for me. There's no other lab that I know of that has that close proximity where we can be that type of an asset. They also reciprocate to me in this distance determination. They'll take a one-to-one photograph of if it's on the body, not the clothing, and I can do my distance determination based on their one-to-one photograph that they give me. The lab is also located in the same building across from the Lehigh County Special Ops. And they have a cage with vast support of tools and gear that has also helped me in my casework. I work closely with 3 neighboring counties, Berks, Montgomery, and Delaware County. Each one is a single examiner county, and what we do is we peer review each other's work, and if I'm calling it an identification, I'll bring one of them in. They'll look at the same items that I'm calling an identification, and they'll give me a thumbs up on it. If they don't agree with me, I'm not allowed to call it a match. I have to call it a could have been. So we keep each other on the straight and narrow. I stay proficient with 3 tests annually. One is a bullet or a cartridge case ID, one's a tool mark ID, and one's a serial number restoration. These are from a private company. It goes out to labs across the world. I take annual training and I go to seminars as often as I can to stay current in my field. And right now my current turnaround time is less than 6 days. I have a backlog of 0 while carrying a workload of over 240 cases last year. I have a good working rapport with all the police departments within Lehigh County. I accommodate their requests. I'm just a phone call away. They know that. And in return, they've been sending me their ammunition that they have slated for destruction, which I use in functionality testing. And that clears their inventory and it drives costs down for the county. Anybody have any questions for me?
Thank you, Mark. For the sake of time, since we have about 10 minutes left in the webinar, we are going to move on to the next presenter, and we're going to open question submissions at the end. So the next presenter that we have is Commanding Officer Paul Iannacci. Paul is going to be discussing forensics in Lehigh County. So Paul, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Good evening. As Laura said, my name is Paul Iannacci. I'm a retired Pennsylvania State Trooper. And can you put the slides up, please? I'll go through them pretty quick.
Sure.
I'm a retired Pennsylvania State Trooper. The District Attorney opened the Lehigh County, the Officer David M. Petzold Digital Forensic Lab of Lehigh County, March 24th, 2011. And it's fitting that I go last because everybody, all the digital evidence that they send into us, they weren't done very, very, very quickly. So I'm going to talk kind of quickly and try to finish up here. And we always, every single crime or some sort of digital artifact, piece of evidence. And I'm going to talk about the lab. I have to mention Detective Scott McCullough. He's a Lehigh County detective, retired Allentown Police. I work in a lab full-time, and we have a civilian analyst, Kristen Cobb Wilkins, and she's a graduate of Chestnut Hill College in Philadelphia. Go to the next slide, please. And the lab, that's David. The lab is named after David Petzold, an Upper Saukon Township police officer who was killed in the line of duty. And he went to DeSales University. He was involved in digital forensics with the Pennsylvania State Police, our task force there. So Jim Martin thought it, and DeSales University fitting that we named the lab after David. Next slide, please. And so I'm from New Jersey. I could talk pretty quick. So the mission is to provide highly technical digital forensics. And we also do cyber crime investigations to all agencies in Lehigh and Northampton counties. The next slide, please. As I said, every crime, there's some sort of technology involved. The David M. Petzold Digital Forensics Lab partnerships include DeSales University, who are very gracious to Lehigh County. They don't charge us rent. They carved out a piece of space in the basement of Doyne Hall. We give back to DeSales University by having interns come into the lab, and we feed off of them, they feed off of us. It's a great relationship. Upper Saukon Township is a great partner. Again, that's where David was killed in the line of duty. We have the Lehigh County, Northampton counties that we support. We have a lot of task force members. We have law enforcement partners from state to federal. And also, I have to mention the Petzold Foundation, which has given in upwards of $250,000 to Lehigh County to support the David M. Petzold Digital Forensics Lab. It was started by David's wife, Jessica. Next slide, please. And I could talk forever, so I know I only have 5 minutes. That's a sign at the lab where, again, DeSales is a great partner for us. Next, and we're going to give you a virtual tour now. So this starts when you come to DeSales, you park in a parking spot. When you walk into, I thought it would be pretty geeky to give a virtual tour of the lab. When you walk into our space, that's what you see, a picture of David. Next slide, please, our check-in area. This is a picture of inside the lab. It's restricted, the area. Only law enforcement and members of the lab are allowed in there. Civilians are allowed into the lab if they're escorted because we have evidence. And that's one of the digital forensics lab computers that we use in our lab. Next slide, please. And that's a computer that was we use in the lab. It's the best of the best. You can't get any better than the computers we use. That computer there is 72 terabytes, can hold 72 terabytes of data, which is a lot if you don't know much about computers and digital forensics. And that's a really, really high-speed computer. Next slide. Again, that's another picture inside the lab. That's a laptop, and there's a hard drive sitting there, and we're analyzing that hard drive. Next slide. And like I said a few minutes ago, in the digital age that we are in and the criminal justice system, everyone is affected by the digital age. Thanks for making that smaller. From first responders all the way to social services and how do we dispose of the digital evidence, especially the devices that contain child pornography and crimes against children. So the whole criminal justice system is affected by the digital age, and we are extremely busy in the lab. Next slide, please. Next slide. So in the 21st century, again, technology is used in every single investigation. Everyone who talked prior to me tonight, we are all a team. They come to us and they say, hey, Paulie, what can you get us from these digital devices? And now what can you get us from the cloud to help support our investigation? And contrary to what you see on TV, everything we analyze, everything we do, there is a search warrant, a court order, or subpoena. We do not analyze anything without a court order, search warrant, or subpoena. Next slide, please. Digital forensics and backlogs. Most people think because of television, Hollywood, and a lot of the TV shows you see, we can analyze a computer or mobile device in like 5 or 10 minutes. That is not true. The mobile devices are increasing, their capacity is increasing really fast. And we can't analyze a phone in 10 minutes. It takes days to analyze one phone. Next slide, please. Most of the devices we analyze are mobile devices now. CSI Cyber, we can't do what they do. We cannot put a 3D hologram in the middle of the room and throw out data to the police officers in the field who are trying to investigate a homicide. But we do a lot of high-speed work in our lab, and we find the pieces of the puzzle to help the investigators with their homicides, whatever investigation they have. And I'd be remiss if I don't say we also perform cyber investigations from everything you can think of, child exploitation to homicide investigations, how the internet was used to perform identity theft, which is the fastest growing crime in the world. I could talk forever, but that's the last slide. Next slide. I'd love to give you guys a tour and or talk to you in person, because I have a lot of show and tell, a lot of different devices that we've taken from crime scenes I can show you. Maybe we could do that next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And again, I'd like to thank everyone who came out this evening, everyone who took the time out of their busy schedules from the DA's office to speak tonight. My apologies if it was a little rushed in the end because there were so many great speakers trying to get all that great information out there. I also would like to thank all our attendees in the audience tonight. Unfortunately, at this time, due to the number of speakers and information we put out there, there won't be a time for a Q&A. However, we have decided that if you'd like to submit a question, you may submit your question to Pamela Lehman, Public Information Officer for the DA's Office and Executive Aide. Her email is going to be pamela.lehigh.county.org, and you'll be receiving a follow-up email with that email that you can use for your reference. I also like to remind everyone that a recording of this webinar to review at your leisure will be available starting tomorrow afternoon. So please feel free to look back on the information presented tonight and use it if you have any questions to follow up. Again, I would like to thank everyone for participating in this year's Citizens Academy. This is the finale of the Citizens Academy. It's our last segment for 2021. We hope that we have a great turnout just as much next year. As of now, that concludes the end of our webinar. I wish everyone a great night.
Thank you, Laura. Good night.
Mm-hmm.